Hello and welcome to another episode of Thick Slices and Deep Cuts. Tonight's episode, vastly different from any previous episodes I've done. And as the music starts to come in, you'll know why. It's far different from anything that you may have heard before, and that's because this episode's the theme is gonna be guilty pleasure bands, guilty pleasure artists, guilty pleasure music in general. And if you can hear that, I'm pretty sure that's the Bee Gees. So this episode is just stuff in the collection that does not fit the theme of the music behind me. So usually, I've said it before, but usually the music that I discuss is like thrash or death or prog, big time, or even the dark ambient, or even just like classic metal. Nothing I showcase today is going to fit any of those categories, or really doesn't fit any of those categories, but it's pretty well known. And you know, while I listen to this stuff probably 90 to 95% of the time, there is a soft spot for some stuff that just, you know, as you grow up as a kid, you kind of, you know, your parents listen to it, so you like it, those things. And one of the things, my dad said the first thing I ever liked and started to dance to was the Bee Gees. We've got Jive Talking on right now. You got Night Fever, Tragedy, You Should Be Dancing, Staying Alive, How Deep Is Your Love, If I Can't Have You, More Than a Woman, all that stuff. Remember these guys? Anyway, I think this is, just a massive greatest hits from just the stuff that they did in like 75 to 79. So they had a whole career before they went disco. But for whatever reason, I'm not necessarily saying I'm a huge fan of disco, but I like the Commodore's Brick House as well, but I do like some Bee Gees. It just reminds me of being like 2 years old or 3 years old, or just the tiniest kid. Tiniest little kid, but there you go, Bee Gees. That's definitely a guilty pleasure band, considering what's on the wall behind me. Okay, these next ones, I don't know if this is even guilty pleasure. It's just, you know, I like Journey. What can I say? You know, Infinity, it's got, you know, Wheel in the Sky, Lights, some other stuff. The first one was Steve Perry. Ainsley Dunbar was still the drummer for one more album there. You know, Departure was alright. Captured Live, cool album cover. This one here in the beginning is the greatest hits of the 3 albums they did without Steve Perry. So this is when they were more of a jazz fusion band. Neil Schon and Greg Raleigh, I think, were in Santana before this, so they left Santana and formed their own fusion band. Those first 3 albums are great. In fact, I could argue that the first Journey album might be my favorite one. It's definitely their proggies with Kohutak and some of those other songs on there. But, you know, Journey, do they have some cheesy hits that you never want to hear again? Like, yeah, I would steer clear of their greatest hits, but they still have good material on Frontiers and Escape and the ones I just showed. And even Raised on Radio is cheesy, but it's still good cheesy. It's guilty pleasure for sure. But, you know, Journey, and you can't talk about Journey without talking about 2 other bands, I don't think. Heart, 70s Heart, I like 70s Heart. Magazine, Dog and Butterfly is my favorite. I need to get Little Queen on vinyl because that's a really good one. I think Dog and Butterfly is my favorite. Just the song Minstrel Wind is really good. Not a One, Hijinks, Straight On, all those songs. And then I have this 3-disc greatest hits, which basically covers even more of the 70s stuff and stuff from Little Queen, but it also covers all that 80s stuff, which that's where I'm glad they made money in the 80s. That's the Heart I don't listen to, is the 80s Heart where they got big. But there was an early 80s Heart where they kind of, Fabulous Strange and Something and Passion Works, they did 3 albums in the early 80s that went nowhere. But I've got music from that era on here too, and then they kind of had the resurgence in the mid to late 80s. And it's got some newer stuff on there, but I do like 70s Heart for sure. Those 4 albums in the 70s were excellent. So you can't really talk about Journey without talking about Heart, or without talking about Def Leppard. So High and Dry, most people say, oh yeah, that's the killer rock and metal one. Cool stuff. And they're like, okay, Pyromania, we can still hang with them. This is the first, I got this on vinyl, the first album I ever owned in my life. Pyromania. I used to be obsessed with Def Leppard and AC/DC and all that. So I don't even know if this is guilty pleasure. I didn't bring in my AC/DC because I don't think there's anything embarrassing about liking them. But Pyromania. Then they get to Hysteria, and a lot of people really hate this. Yeah, I don't want to hear Pour Some Sugar on Me ever again, but I like it. It's pretty cool. Gods of War is all right. It's a great production. I mean, it's not as classic as these, but the production's incredible. But I think I'm going to do one of those 3-pack episodes. If I can get like a female co-host, I'm going to do a 3-pack episode with a female co-host where we cover Journey, and I'll let them do all the talking. Journey, Heart, and Def Leppard right there. That should be an episode with a female co-host right there. All right, moving on. Here's kind of a scene. So my dad has so much 70s folk music on vinyl, and I inherited some of it. And I never really latched on to folk, but I will say this: I do enjoy a little Gordon Lightfoot. And I used to ask my dad if he named me Gordon because of this guy, but no, it's a family name. But I do like a little Gordon Lightfoot. I like his style of folk. He's Canadian. He paints a good picture with his music. It sounds good. I think we're going to hear him coming up next, but. Right now we're hearing another folk artist I really like who's also Canadian, and that is Joni Mitchell. And while not everything Joni Mitchell does is up my alley, this album in particular from '76, Hira, it's got Jaco Pastorius on fretless bass. Oh, it's awesome. We're listening to it right now. Song for Sharon, the title track's great, Coyote's great. It's just probably her most ethereal album. And so I really dig some Joni Mitchell, and especially this album. So there you go. Again, not a big 70s folk guy, but I'll take these two Canadian artists right here, Lightfoot and Mitchell, for sure. All right, moving on. Oh, here's just some stuff that when I was a kid, my dad had all these, so I just grew up on them. I mean, Huey Lewis and the News, Heart and Soul. What else was on here? The Heart of Rock and Roll, but Heart and Soul was my favorite song. I Want a New Drug. That was always good. Anyway, so Huey Lewis, you see, I mean, there's some of these things are total guilty pleasure, just, pop, mainstream stuff. I mean, who didn't own this one, right? Thriller? I mean, come on, is this like one of the biggest selling albums of all time? Beat It, the song Thriller, Billie Jean, Human Nature. Everything on there was a hit, I think. And then one other, I don't even think this is a guilty pleasure, but, Dire Straits, this was the big album. Was it you get your music on they play your guitar on the MTV. But you know what? I like this album legitimately. They came out in 80, before that one. And their first one has Sultans of Swing. So I mean, it's kind of hard to say Dire Straits are a guilty pleasure band because I kind of like Mark Knopfler's guitar playing, and I really dig that some of the vibes they get on Love Over Gold and the Sultans of Swing, that first album. This is maybe a surprise. The other one, I don't even know if it really counts as a guilty pleasure, but I'll put it up here. But this guy, Ted Nugent, obnoxious, chauvinistic, macho. I don't know, what can I say? I like some 70s Ted Nugent. State of Shock. Is it ridiculous? It's kind of ridiculous. Are the lyrics terrible? Yeah. But they're so terrible, it's almost classic. Free for All, probably my favorite one. Well, you know what? Double Gonzo Live with Stranglehold and all that stuff on. This might be the best one, but it's not a studio album, but Double Live Gonzo. I need to get his first album with the studio version of Stranglehold, but I don't know. It's not quite metal, but it's rocking and it's ridiculous and over the top. What can I say? I'm kind of a fan of the Nuge. Now this one, I don't think this is a guilty pleasure, because what's wrong with liking ZZ Top? ZZ Top's great. This is the only physical one I have here, but the stuff they did, I think, is Diguelo, Cheap Sunglasses, the stuff they did earlier on in the earlier part of the 70s, and then what Afterburner had Sleeping Bag. They kind of like went down and down and down, but some people have told me their more recent stuff over the last 20 years has been pretty good and pretty jamming. But I've always liked ZZ Top. But again, I don't know if this is a guilty pleasure band. Who doesn't like ZZ Top? Speaking of a genre that I grew up during, but you would think, because a lot of people my age, they really have an affinity for the glam rock, hair metal thing. I call it glam rock because there wasn't too much metal about it. But I was not, I grew up during that time, but I found the 80s, the best thing about the 80s was the heavy factor. You start with, British Steel and Back in Black, and by the end of the decade, thrash has been mastered and you've got death metal creeping in. So I thought the best thing about the 80s was the evolution of heaviness. Because in the 70s, you had almost no legitimate heavy bands. And then, 79, 80, that new wave of British heavy metal started to bring in some stuff. And by the end, you had it all at that point. But here's what I have pertaining to the glam rock, to the hair metal scene. So let's start with Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil. I also like their first album, Too Fast for Love. That one's pretty good. This one's probably my favorite. And then they just completely fell off with Theater of Pain, which I used to have as a kid and didn't like it. And then they had Girls, Girls, Girls. All I remember about that was I liked Wild Side and the title track, and I liked nothing else on the album. So it was one of those albums where if you get a greatest hits, you might have Girls, Girls, Girls covered. And then they did Dr. Feelgood, which I kind of liked, but I was also kind of not listening to this kind of music by the time that came. By the time that came out, I was like off into heavier technical, Metallica, Slayer, Testament, Anthrax, all that Megadeth, all that stuff I was into. So when Dr. Feelgood came out, I was just kind of like, even if it's good, I'm not paying too much attention to it. And by 90 or 91, I was even more into the deep end of extreme music. But I think early Motley Crue was pretty good, and I think they had talent when they wanted to. Well, I don't know about Vince, but they could write some songs when they wanted to. But so Motley Crue was one of the few hair metal CDs. And again, when I was a kid, I had most of their stuff in the 80s. I think I even had Dr. Feelgood on cassette, and it was like in mint condition because I never listened to it. Not because it wasn't a decent bop rock production, but just because I bought it, but was kind of, I'm not even sure why I bought it. I was already kind of moved on from that stuff at the time. Who didn't have, Rat? Out of the Cellar, their best album. I'm pretty sure everybody's in agreement with that. But if you still like other Rat songs, but you realize that Rat doesn't really have any good albums other than their first full length, just get the Greatest Hits 81 to 91. You got 2 songs from an EP they put out in like 83. And you got Lay It Down and You're in Love from Invasion of Your Privacy. Those are arguably the best 2 songs on there. You got Slip of the Lip, Dance and Body Talk from Dancing Undercover. Not a good album, but you got 3 songs from there on here. Probably the best 3. And then from Reach for the Sky, you got Way Cool Jr. and I Want a Woman. Those are probably the best songs from that album. And then they give you a ton from whatever that final album was that they put out in 90. And then they stick on Nobody Writes for Free, which was on the soundtrack for Point Break. Which, man, if you're my age, Point Break was an awesome movie. And by that point, Rat wasn't really that great anymore, but that song is pretty good. So this compilation of Rat, I feel like between these 2, you got pretty much everything you need with Rat. And then, say what you will about their lyrics, but I always dug Dokken, George Lynch, Back for the Attack. I need to have Tooth and Nail, and I do have Beast from the East Live, which has some songs from Tooth and Nail, but and you got Breaking the Chains, the song on here, but man, Tooth and Nail was an excellent album. So even though these guys were total hair metal, I think Back to the Attack. I even think Under Lock and Key was pretty good. So I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I think, for my money, I think Dokken was probably my favorite hair metal band. Because I do dig Tooth and Nail. I kind of dig Breaking the Chains. I kind of dig Under Lock and Key, even though they're totally glammed out. And I love this album to death. Back for the Attack. The song Mr. Scary is great. Just his guitar crunch on here is just, his tone is great. Lost Behind the Wall. So I do like some Dokken, but that's about the extent. Well, there's a little bit here. I am not a fan of Whitesnake, but this is the greatest hits, and the reason I have the greatest hits is for one song, "Still of the Night." So, "Still of the Night" is the song of Whitesnake's that I just think is a great song, regardless of whether you think Whitesnake are cheesy or not. "Still of the Night's a great song. You know, and that's a total John Sykes type song. And so I am kind of a fan of John Sykes. And so John Sykes formed this band Blue Murder. Well, there's one song on here I like. It's Valley of the Kings. And Valley of the Kings to me is like another it's like Still of the Night Part 2. It's another big epic type of a song. In fact, I think it's like over 7 minutes long, and I think Still of the Night's got to be about 6 minutes. They're big, long songs that go places and just have big, epic riffs and choruses. So I always liked those two songs from that John Sykes, basically wrote. I like those two. So there you go. I don't know if I like Whitesnake. I like two John Sykes songs, Still of the Night and Valley of the Kings. So there you go. That's me covering 80s hair metal. Okay. The rest of these are more modern. I guess you'd be like 90s into the early 2000s. I don't know. People hate nu metal. And I don't really know. It's hard to hate the bands that created the genre because they were original. And people hate this band, but I really love the debut. And that was from Korn back in '94. And not only is this completely original and out of nowhere, but they're using these down-tuned 7-string guitars. So they got 7s, which nobody was using, and they down-tuned them. So they were just getting this. I was just obsessed with wanting to buy an Ibanez Universe, which, by the way, I have since purchased. I think it's the one that Monkey Schaefer was using. And mine is down-tuned to A as well, because at the time when this came out, this was the only band using it full-time. Dream Theater on Awake in '94, Petrucci was using it on a couple of songs like The Mirror and Lie, and that was cool, but it wasn't full-time. And in '93, Trey Azagthoth and Morbid Angel used it on God of Emptiness, and I think it was, World of Shit. But they weren't using it full-time. And so I was hearing little bits and pieces of 7-string guitar, but I mean, when I heard Korn, it was just like down-tuned 7s all the time. And I still think to this day, their best album is their first album. But I don't have I'm not saying everything Korn has put out since is great. Some of their stuff that they put out is kind of cringeworthy, but I'll always put high marks for this first album they did. It was very revolutionary. Band that you talk about in the same breath with them that some people hate. I don't know. I like them too. Deftones. They're cool. They got a melodic edge to them. People hate them. I don't know. I'm not saying I love the Deftones, but they have their moments. This isn't the only album by them that I have. So Korn and the Deftones, whatever you want to call it, I kind of like it. Marilyn Manson. I really only like one album he did, but it's the Antichrist Superstar one that I think Trent Reznor helped him kind of write this album. So it's got a bit of a dark Nine Inch Nails industrial thing, but is that guilty pleasure to like Marilyn Manson? I don't know. It's just this one album. I think the next album he went androgynous, and I think Billy Corgan helped him write that one, and I immediately dropped off there. But or in the early days, he kind of had a cool shock factor. And this album had some songs on it I kind of like. And, again, I'm growing up in the 80s and 90s, so, who else from that era? Here's a band that people hate. And I'm not saying I love them. They have a couple of songs on here, though, but that's Slipknot. What do they got here? Gematria and Sulfur. Those are good. Dead Memories. So Slipknot are one of those bands to me that they don't, kind of like Korn, they're going to give you one or two awesome songs, but the album in totality is not maybe the greatest, but they'll give you a hook here and there. So I don't know. I don't understand the hatred for some of these bands. Just because they're successful, if you don't like them, it's fine. Poke fun at them, but if a band has good music, I'm not gonna just not acknowledge the good music because for some reason I just hate new metal or whatever the case is. So I have this Slipknot album. Is this a guilty pleasure? Do people hate them? I don't know if people hate System of a Down. I kind of thought they were cool back in the day. Again, I don't know if they fit the new metal. I don't know what category they fit, but I just thought I'd lump them in with Korn, Deftones, Marilyn Manson, Slipknot, System of a Down, stuff like that. I have a lot of friends, especially females, that love country music, and I don't understand country music, but my answer to country music is just really American music, and the most American band I listen to would probably be Alter Bridge, who I like. I don't know if they're considered not cool, but I like Tremonti and I like Miles Kennedy's vocals. And I also like Tremonti's solo stuff, where he sings and the songs are pretty ripping. Here's the most hated band of the night, Creed. Back in the day, I bought the debut album, back in '97. Bought the debut album, thought it was pretty catchy. I thought all 10 songs were catchy. You could say what you want about Scott Stapp's vocals, and you could say what you want about whether this album has aged well over the last 20 some odd years. But I had it in the beginning, and when I heard Alter Bridge after Creed disbanded, I thought, wow, this is way better than Creed. This is like heavy. A little more, the guitars are way better and the vocals are way better. And then you hear some of Tremonti's solo stuff, and you're like, wow, some of that's at least as good as Alter Bridge. So, I don't, the more Tremonti spectrum I kind of keep up with. Creed's kind of dated and obsolete, but, Alter Bridge, those first Blackbird and 3, I really like those two albums a lot. And I think they're coming out with another one. And I really liked this Tremonti album. I like the first one too. But Tremonti is, I think he's a good player. He's pretty underrated. I don't know if he's beloved or hated or people are indifferent because he was in Creed. I just wouldn't hold anything against Mark Tremonti because he was in Creed. What else? I really dug Filter back in the day. The main guy, Richard Patrick, he was in 9 Inch Nails for Pretty Hate Machine, then he formed. But I think these two albums here are like perfection. Like as far as production, this album's incredible. This album's even better. This has all good songs. This doesn't have all good songs, but the songs that are good are just incredible. So Filter, I don't think they're hated. I just think people kind of forgot about them, or they label them some sort of like alt metal, post-grunge, alt metal, industrial. I've always been a fan of early Filter. And then, is this guilty pleasure? Is it to like early Smashing Pumpkins? I mean, I don't know what they were called, alternatives. I kind of lumped them in with the grunge bands. I guess they're kind of grungy. And speaking of that, I don't have any physical copies, but another band, Stone Temple Pilots, that first album, those first two, is that a guilty pleasure? Those were good albums. And I really like Nirvana's Bleach. That is the grungiest sounding album. I don't care whatever people's definition of grunge is, go listen to Bleach by Nirvana. That is the epitome of grunge. Nevermind's okay, but it almost sounds too polished to me. Like back in the day, I thought it sounded raw, and that was grunge. It was just like simple songs that were raw, but you listen to it now, you're like, that was actually played to a T, whereas Bleach is just classically just raw and just has that vibe of what was going on in '89 in Seattle. That was kind of the dawn, the birth of it. But I'm a big fan of early Nirvana, Bleach. I should have that here to show, but again, is that guilty pleasure? Yeah, it might be. But there you go. So I think that is all I brought here was a little bit of this sort of new metal stuff, a little bit of this post-grunge stuff, a little bit of the grunge stuff, you know, some 80s hair metal, you know, to go along with the arena rock, and certainly some folky, you know, some singer-songwriter stuff and everything else. But so there you go. That is just an episode where I went through my catalog, my stuff, and tried to find all sort of the anomalies. The things don't really fit the normal genres of what I listen to, and that's what I pulled out for today. So there you have it. That is going through my guilty pleasure artists or bands that I own. So there you go. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.